Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on this beautiful sunny Thursday morning. We're just starting to see the room begin to fill up with guests, so we'll give it a couple more minutes just to allow folks to pop in. So feel free to either get yourselves settled or to grab a tea and coffee and get ready for a very interesting member workshop this morning. Okay, looks like we're starting to see a full house, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Taryn Sebula, and I'm a Senior Manager of Member Engagement here at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thank you all for joining this morning's session hosted by one of our valued members, 369Konnect. In this member workshop, we will learn how to measure the true value of a brand. In the 1970s, almost 85% of the value created in our economy was from tangible assets like property, plant, and equipment. Today, that number is just 15%. Intangible assets like brand, reputation, data, and intellectual property now account for more than 85% of the value created in the economy. While organizations should be making intelligent investment in amplifying intangible assets, the two key players, being finance and marketing, remain at odds because one is focused on advertising and communications, while the other lacks the tools to measure true brand ROI. This morning, our esteemed speaker, Mark Ratha, will walk us through how brand economics can provide both parties with a new way to measure success, one that is both financially responsible while also allowing marketers to be creative, the true differentiation of brand versus marketing versus reputation, the realization that intangibles such as data, reputation, and brand generate more value in today's economy than tangible assets, as well as how to create a brand economics playbook for your organization. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Toronto is home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Though you could be watching from anywhere, the board's offices are located on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. I'll now pass the mic over to Mark to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Give me 1 second while I launch the presentation. Taryn, is it showing?
We're good.
Amazing, amazing. So I'm super excited to be here with you today. We've got quite a bit to pack into a very short amount of time. I was just telling Taryn that depending on how this goes, we might actually have to host a kind of roll up your sleeves workshop afterwards at some point so that we can actually get through a lot of this because it is quite dense. And so let's dive into it. And before we get deep into it, what I want to do is quickly level set on a few things and start off by just kind of talking a little bit about where I come from and how we come up with this notion called brand economics. At heart, I'm a finance geek. That's what I studied in school. And after that, I actually joined private equity. And I was involved with funding everything from startups all the way to companies in the mid-market, right? So 0 to about $100 million. And it was interesting because being in the finance space, we thought we knew it all, right? We knew exactly, or we thought we knew exactly where value comes from and how to identify it and how to invest in it and where to grow. And for the most part, we did a pretty good job. But there was a whole other side to running a business and to managing your brand overall that we fully didn't grasp at that time. I had the pleasure of actually jumping ship from private equity and diving into, at that time, a company that was just emerging into the Canadian and global marketplace, and that was Lululemon. And it was completely different than what I had experienced in my finance world. Right? When we look at Lululemon today, we see it as this brand that has this amazing cult following in the marketplace. But it was something that they had to build up over time. Lululemon, when I was with them and in the culture side of Lululemon, I was there, long before Chip Wilson took it public, even before we had private equity investment into the company. But what was really remarkable about Lululemon and its growth trajectory was that they didn't spend any money on traditional marketing and advertising. So think about that for a second. A brand that builds a cult following that we see today spent no money on marketing and advertising to get themselves to that point. Instead, Lululemon developed two pillars of their brand, community being one of them, and culture being that second pillar. And that's where I worked in on the culture side. And it was amazing because, without advertising, without traditional marketing, without discounting, we weren't buying our customers, right? We were creating true brand advocates that were willing to pay the price premium, right? You could buy a $30 hoodie at any one of the competitors, or you could spend $130 and buy a hoodie with Lululemon. And that price premium was defensible in the marketplace. And it was amazing to really kind of spend that time with this company and grow. And from there, I ended up actually jumping ship into brand valuation, to understand how do we actually kind of quantify these feelings that we have for brands. And I had the pleasure of running strategy and working with iconic brands like Cirque du Soleil, Facebook with their acquisitions, Canada Goose, Sick Kids, Canadian Tire, and a whole host of other companies on the global scale. And one of the things that I always kind of get when I show this slide, because it's a point of pride for me, but it's always that fear of, but those are billion-dollar brands, and I might not be a billion-dollar brand. So how does this apply to me? And one of the things that we have to realize about these brands that were shown on that slide and all of us is that the same things that keep them up at night are the same things that keep us up at night when it comes to growing and defending our place in the market. The only difference between the two is that they just have a lot more zeros on their financial statements than we do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always making the right decisions or that the wrong decision isn't going to cost them dearly and it could possibly be the end. As we run through today's deck, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is every time we talk about brand, we're not actually going to be talking about the look and feel, because brand actually, true brand goes beyond marketing and advertising. So before we dive in to kind of show around the case study of how you go about measuring and getting true brand ROI, there's a few things that we need to level set on. And the first being that intangibles are the new raw materials, right? And if we look at the composition of the S&P 500 back in the 70s, right, the majority of the value created in the S&P 500 was from tangible assets, right? Things that you could touch, kiss, throw, kick, drop, and they made a sound, right? Property, plant, equipment, steel, machinery, that type of thing. And if we fast forward to today, and if we look at the composition of the S&P 500 and the assets that underpin it, those numbers have flipped to today, right? 85% of the value of the S&P 500 actually comes from intangible assets, right? Things that we cannot hug and kiss and throw, and when we drop them, they don't make any sound, right? And some of those intangibles are things like patents, right? And it's always interesting to see how we relate to like intellectual property, right? The coding for the iPhone may be registered with Apple for several $100,000, but it brings in well over several $billion of revenue to the organization, right? There's a mismatch. So the value is there, but it's not fully recognized. There's also value in data, right? I mean, Google's entire business system, as well as a lot of us, really leverage data and the true value of data to create unbelievable amounts of value and to generate revenue for ourselves, right? So we know that data has immense value. Even reputation is incredibly important. We see a lot of organizations acquiring other companies solely on the base of reputation. And it's so interesting. I spend a lot of my time actually in the US working with US companies and dealing with the SEC. And in a lot of the discussions, the one thing that comes up with a lot of financial regulators and banks is that they're not worried about things like the traditional risk elements like currency risk or counterparty risk. The number one risk element that they're worried about today with a lot of organizations is reputational risk, right? Because that has a huge impact on the organization. The value at risk is high. And of course, we know that relationships are radically important and even trademarks, right? So this rise of intangibles has happened over time, and it's really taken over how we operate today. That's why when we look at the largest retail store that's out there, it doesn't own any of its own inventory. The largest taxi company doesn't own any of its own vehicles, right? They leverage intangibles to really drive value for themselves today. Airbnb, the largest accommodations provider, doesn't have any of their own real estate, right? And if we look at the value they create, based on 2021 revenue, Airbnb was larger than Marriott, Hilton, Intercontinental, Choice, Wyndham, American Airlines, and the International Airlines Group combined, right? And then think about how many assets, like physical assets and resorts and buildings and whatnot, that Hilton and Marriott and everyone else has to actually generate all this value, but Airbnb can surpass that. Same thing with Tesla, right? They don't produce the most number of cars, but they're still the most valuable auto manufacturer out there. We even see intangibles kind of come into light during the COVID crisis, right? When COVID hit, we saw air travel just absolutely plummet. And there's a lot of airlines out there that needed financing and funding. And so one of those airlines was United Airlines, right? They were able to raise $5 billion simply through their customer loyalty program, right? Completely intangible. And one of the interesting parts about this is when you actually look at the value of the airline relative to its customer loyalty program. United Airlines has approximately a $10 billion market cap. Their loyalty program, this intangible asset that's heavily branded and brand driven, is worth $21.9 billion. That's staggering, right? It is unbelievable. It is worth more than all their physical aircraft put together, right? Same thing for Delta. Their market cap was 20 billion, but their loyalty program, a heavily brand-driven program, 26 billion. American Airlines Group, $6 billion market cap, and their estimated loyalty program is over $25.5 billion, right? This is truly unbelievable, and it's really great representation of where we are in today's economy relative to the 70s and even earlier. The ingredients that we use to build great brands have changed, and they've changed radically. And what's interesting about this is that if you start to look at the only measurement system that we have for how do you actually determine value and value brands or understand, how you should invest into brands and the return you get is accounting, right? There's just GAAP accounting. And what you start to realize is that GAAP accounting doesn't actually isn't the right yardstick to be able to measure and encapsulate and to quantify all of these things. The next thing we have to level set on is that brand is like an ecosystem, right? Just like the ecosystem of Earth, right? There are countless things which we don't interact with necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but exist and are incredibly important for the health of us here on Earth, and equally so, for brands and other organizations in the market. So if we start to break this down, what we start to see is that at its very core, we have certain brand elements that we know are internally controllable and typically externally visible, right? And these are the usual suspects of brand. When we talk about brand, this is what we mean sometimes, right? Marketing, customer service, the channel products, and even like packaging kind of falls into that definition of brand, right? That's that typical definition of brand. But we call that little b brand, the simple b, when we say the word brand. And there are elements which kind of reside above this that are internal, so you still control them internally, but they're not as visible, but they're incredibly impactful with respect to your brand, right? Your sales strategy, logistics, culture, right? Culture is one of those things which is intangible, extremely valuable to organizations today. Your trade secrets, intellectual property. If I think about like Amazon Marketplace, right? There's this amazing platform that I go and like shop on. And I pick up my phone, I order something, and I'm expecting that my doorbell is going to ring the next day or the day after. If I were to boil down what Amazon's brand is and the most valuable part about Amazon's brand, number one, obviously I'm going to say it's its platform, but I'm going to say it's logistics and distribution systems and intelligence that runs around that, right? I'm not going to be offended if Amazon changed its logo from that orange smiley face to a blue smiley face, right? That's not brand, that's branding. That's just the logo and the outward representation of their brand, but their true brand itself is fundamentally based on something that's incredibly deep within their ecosystem, right? But makes everything flow extremely well, so you have a great experience. Amazon's brand is not its logo. Amazon's brand is its logistics and distribution intelligence systems. And then there's this external layer that brand touches as well. Things like customer sentiment, so how people think and feel about your organization, the products and services, how you're rated and ranked, industry trends, even economic conditions like COVID. All of these things matter and impact your brand. A great example of that is like Forever 21, right? COVID came and Forever 21 stayed in Forever 2020, right? It was never able to kind of make it out because it couldn't bridge that brick to click model that was expected of the brand in the marketplace. And so if we grab all of these things together, what we need to level set on is that the entirety of this is brand. That's that big B definition of brand, right? There's no simple saying that I have for it. It's messy, it's large, it's an ecosystem. There's a lot of working parts to this. And together, all of it is your brand. And this is why simply changing your representation in the marketplace doesn't automatically improve your financial outcomes, right? Yahoo can go from one shade of purple, italics to bold, and back and forth over and over. Nothing fundamentally changed. It is still a brand that's being eroded in the marketplace every single year. It's rather different when GM changes their logo because it's a representation of something that's fundamentally changed about their organization. The fact that they're moving from internal combustion engine vehicles to EVs, right? So that representation is okay. And remember when we talked about culture and the value of culture, there's some amazing brands out there that we look at and we start to realize culture is a huge driving force of their value, right? So if you think about, how do you actually improve brand ROI, you got to figure out what's the most important part and invest into those things to drive financial outcomes, and then you'll have amazing and positive ROI. One of those is we looked at IBM and Microsoft, and the chief diversity officer of IBM ended up leaving, and they took a very similar role at Microsoft, and IBM ended up suing Microsoft. And it was so interesting when you start to actually look at how they defended this move in the market. IBM actually said that its diversity strategy, so it's not even its overall culture strategy, it's how they do diversity and what their recruitment tactics are, how they report the KPIs and that type of stuff, conferred to them a competitive advantage in the market, right? And if it got out, it can impact innovation, cause competitive harm. We've never heard companies speak about diversity in this way and how material it is to their success in the marketplace. Microsoft actually agreed with them and says that diversity and inclusion is a business imperative, right? It can foster greater innovation. They said it's increased satisfaction, productivity, and even corporate profitability, right? So if you start to parse out through what is the most important or one of the most important assets to Microsoft and IBM when it comes to generating profits, productivity, outcomes, culture, specifically diversity, and that strategy is one of the most important things. But if you look at this strictly from an accounting perspective, it does a poor job of actually measuring this, right? Because when you spend on your employees, it's an expense. There's no classification of culture. You can't find culture on the balance sheet, right? You can't find diversity as an asset on the balance sheet in any way. The next thing we need to quickly just level set on is that when we talk about brand, we're actually talking about going beyond the traditional silos and the fiefdoms that are built in organizations, right? Brand is truly a team sport. When you talk about brand ROI and measuring ROI, one of the traps that we get into is that we become very myopic, right? We actually end up talking about brand and our investment into brand, and specifically marketing, as really just the digital mix, right? How much we spent on ads, SEO, the website, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever those things may be. But what we fail to realize is there's a bit of an inception that happens here. Your digital mix is only just one slice of your media mix pie, right? You've got out of home, television, radio, and all these other things that are part of this larger media mix pie, and digital is just one slice of that. And then you realize that, hang on a second, my media mix is just one slice of my overall marketing mix model itself. There's other things out there beyond advertising, right? There's your channel partnerships, events, PR, promotions, direct response, all that other things fall into your marketing mix. And then there's still yet one more pie, right? Your entire marketing mix ends up being one slice of your overall brand experience, right? You've got the product there, you've got patient care or customer care or operations, HR, whatever that may be, as part of this overall pie itself. So when we look at, having the best brand ROI, we really have to just move away strictly just from marketing mix modeling itself. If you had 100% return on your marketing mix, that may apply only just to a portion of why people are buying or engaging with your brand. Customer care may be incredibly important, right? This is why we have to expand that definition of brand to the entire organization as a whole. And we always see when this goes wrong, right? United Airlines, it had the best marketing out there, fly the friendly skies, right? And then operations like, hey guys, there's this thing called overbooking. A lot of people don't show up for their flights. We can actually sell more, and finance is like, hey, we make more. And legal's like, we maybe let's write some sort of disclaimer on our tickets that indemnifies us in some way. But we all know what happened, right? You know, someone ended up getting beaten up on the flight, dragged off the plane, and the impact on American Airlines was a market cap drop of $950 million within 24 hours, right? And yes, United Airlines was able to build that back up over time, but their place in everyone's consideration set was diminished a little bit as well, right? So it ends up being, you know, this is a great example of not everybody playing together or understanding the brand truly is a team sport. We can't just say fly the friendly skies if we're not actually delivering on that experience. And if we're investing a lot of money into this marketing, but operations isn't aligned and customer care isn't aligned, then we're going to end up having a lot of negative outcomes there. So what I want to do is I want to run through the basics of a brand economics framework and show you how you can start to apply it to yourself and how we applied it to one of our clients so that you can actually see this in operation. And brand economics is very straightforward. It's actually something that you live every day and perhaps you don't fully think it through, but it's quite common. There's 4 pillars to it. The first pillar is interactions, right? This is all about identifying all of the touch points that exist in the customer journey. Absolutely anything that is generated by you. So it could be you know, any of the marketing material, your sales team, whatever that may be. But those interactions generate perceptions, how people think and feel about your organization. And those perceptions stimulate behaviors, right? Will they buy from you? Will they not buy from you, right? Not buying is a very important behavior that needs to be measured as well. And those behaviors have financial outcomes. It's not that perceptions have financial outcomes. Behaviors are the ones that have financial outcomes. And the biggest challenge that we have today is that most of us only end with perceptions, how we think about it. Am I willing to consider a brand versus did I actually purchase or did I take actions to actually purchase? So you can actually start to build out certain components of your brand ecosystem. It's always interesting to see how this works because every single brand is going to be different, right? Even if you look at competitive brands within the similar market, they're going to be a little bit different. BMW is going to go to market differently than Mercedes-Benz. And so first we have that first pillar, which is interactions. And it could be all of the assets or all of the functions that you have in your organization, your sales team, marketing, customer service, product, whatever that may be, right? And that is done by function. Or you can start to actually identify by touch point. What are the things that are actually out there and you are creating that people interact with? Social media, trade shows, reviews, etc. And once you've done that, you can actually start to identify all of the perceptions that exist, not just around your brand, but in the industry on how people purchase and interact, right? And so these are just an example of perceptions. Things like, I feel motivated, or, you know, you're trustworthy, I feel valued, it saves me time, whatever those may be. And you can then also start to identify the behaviors that exist around purchase. And it's always interesting because there are some behaviors that are more valuable than others. If we are selling cars, right, we're a car dealership, one of the most important behaviors you can exhibit as a customer of that dealership is, did you go and schedule a test drive? Right? That is incredibly important, right? And maybe a behavior before that is, did you go and price the vehicle out on the website, right? So there are certain behaviors that happen, and some are more valuable than others. And then there are certain financial outcomes. And what's interesting about brand economics, and by the time you get to a point where you can actually start to quantify and start to link all these parts, is that if there's something that you want to moneyball, so something that you want to amplify, you can actually start to trace it backwards throughout the ecosystem. So if there's something happening, whether it be good or bad, you can work backwards to figure out, why is this happening? And can I improve it in some way so I can invest into it in a smarter way? So here's an example. Imagine that you wanted to moneyball this thing called met with a salesperson. This is the most important behavior that you wanted to actually get your customers to exhibit. You're able to actually conduct market research and trace back to figure out, what are the perceptions that drives someone to meet with a salesperson, right? In this case, we found that it was trustworthiness and feeling valued in just this example. But what are the interactions that need to be interacted with, or the touch points that need to be interacted with, that drive those perceptions overall, trustworthy and feeling valued? And in this example was, maybe it's a trade show, or maybe it's the website, or something in social media, or direct mail, or whatever that may be. But once you understand the cause and effect between all of these things, you're able to actually answer the question, if you had only $1 to invest in your brand, do you know where to invest it? Because this is the fundamental side, or the fundamental question of brand ROI, right? ROI is about ruthless prioritization, understanding where that dollar goes and how it amplifies into more. So what I want to do with you is actually walk you through a bit of a case study to show you how this can be used by leveraging market research. And a lot of us here already do market research, right? And some of it is to different, like to varying degrees of sophistication, and that's okay, right? And this is where I was saying, maybe we need to run a deeper workshop here to kind of run through, how do you amplify your research and use data to improve brand ROI, or to be able to measure brand ROI in a deeper way. So the ultimate outcome here is to figure out who you need to talk to, what to say, and where to say it. And that is going to be the playbook that you have, right? That is what's going to generate amazing outcomes. So here's what happened. We were working with a client that had this digital platform, right? They were in the tech space. They were looking to grow quite aggressively in the market. They were only growing about like 3 to 4% every single year. And they said, you know what, we need to actually expand. They've got a lot of investment dollars coming in, and they need to hit somewhere around 20% growth. And this organization was really sales driven. They had a lot of salespeople. And what they realized is, even if we doubled our sales force, we couldn't double our revenue. It just didn't work that way, right? So we had to figure out, how could you actually, with the current budgets that you have, reposition yourself in order to have better brand ROI, increase your output while having your input being the same. And so what we did was, we went out and sourced information that they already had, right? For some of the interactions and perceptions, we used primary research, right? We launched research. For everything else, we use all of the existing data, like the SEO data, third-party industry reports, things that were available for free to everyone else in the industry, right? A lot of data exists. It's about how you actually bring it together and stitch this to create a certain mosaic. And so what we did was, we actually went through some of those brand economic pillars with them and tried to figure out, how can we improve? So one of the first things we did was, we looked at their brand perceptions, right? And these are some of the things that were relevant to them in the industry. And it's so interesting, because if you looked at the very bottom of this, the current brand pillars, the 4 things that they marketed, they spoke about, they positioned on, was this notion of value, easy to integrate, ranked highly by industry, and they have a wide range of services. And some of us are probably nodding because this is some of the stuff that we position off of as well. And I'm not saying it's not relevant to you. It may be relevant to you, but for them, this is what they did. And what was interesting is that the majority of their dollars went into reinforcing this notion of everybody loves us in the industry. Gartner loves us. We're in the magic quadrant. And it was in their hold messages. It was slathered all over their websites and whatnot. So what we did was we said, okay, let's go and figure out, is this even valuable, right? You're spending so much money, you're investing all this money into this brand positioning. Is it actually generating the outcome that you're desiring? So we went out there and we did a little bit of market research, and we've all done this, right? How am I doing relative to my competitors? And we saw two things here. Number one, there was an area of weakness that stood out, right? Well, I scored 20% on this, my competitors scored 39%. So that must mean it's bad. We also found that, the data showed, hey, we're doing better than our competitors. This must mean we should probably lean into our existing strategy. It's working. Well, perhaps we don't have enough information to make this decision. So the next thing that we can do is actually start to look at importance, right? When we all do market research, we can actually figure out and look at, do people even care about this stuff? We think that it's important, right? But to generate higher outcome or output or financial value, we need to figure out, do people care? And what we started to realize here was this notion of ranked highly by industry analysts at the very bottom. People just did not care about it. And there was so much money being invested into it. What bubbled to the top was this notion of trustworthiness and good service. That was important. But one of the things that we know about human psychology is things that we say are important aren't necessarily the things that are actually important. We behave radically different. Everyone says the environment is so important, but how many of us have actually purchased a green product? And the reality is a lot of us have not, right? So there's this drop off. So you actually have to go back and figure out not what people are necessarily saying is important, but how do people actually behave, right? Because we know that behavior is the most important aspect of purchase. And here, if you look at the very bottom, you start to notice that when it comes to their 4 pillars of brand, only one of them was important. Every single other one, the other 3, were at the very bottom of the list of why somebody purchased. So if we're having this conversation of brand, ROI, literally 75% of their strategy in positioning was wrong. Only one of that, which was 25%, was correct. So it's no wonder why they're not seeing the ROI that they want. What's interesting is that, and we're not going to go deep into this today because it's definitely something that we need to workshop with everyone so that we could teach you how to do this, is that if you start to pick out the top 4 that are important, you can actually start to base your new strategy on this, right? Position yourself on the things that are driving actual behavior, not perceptions. And for us, we found that those were this notion of forward thinking, business transformation, good service, and integration. And what was most important here is that you start to realize that this is not something marketing owns. This is something that's owned by other verticals outside of marketing itself, right? Marketing could only talk about forward thinking in a credible way, business transformation, but good service and the number one thing about being easy to integrate, that was all about customer service and customer care, right? So increasing ROI meant that you needed to actually go beyond the marketing function itself and get everyone on board to to walk through and to support you on this notion of true brand ROI across the organization. Shared KPIs, right? So this is just one small example of how you can start to build out and generate better ROI. And short story for this company, they were able to actually surpass their growth goals just by keeping the same brand investment, changing over how they actually invested into the organization, and increasing financial outcome. That was the true brand economics playbook for themselves. So you got to ask yourself, if you had $1 to invest in your brand, do you actually know where to invest, right? This is the fundamental question when it comes to brand ROI overall. And I know we're running out of time, so let me just close with this. Today's marketplace has changed radically, right? We've had unbelievable changes in the economy, the shift from tangibles to intangibles. We've had radical shifts in technology, the ability for us to actually go and measure feelings and thoughts and perceptions and behaviors in ways that we've never been able to do, right? And if we're able to actually bring all of these together, we can actually leverage intangible to create true differentiation in the market and true competitive advantage. And that's what's going to actually start to generate higher brand ROI for all of us. I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I know we have the chat open for questions. And let me hand it back to you, Taryn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Mark. As Mark mentioned, we're going to open up the floor to a Q&A period. So if anyone has any questions for Mark, feel free to pop your questions into the chat. Or feel free to raise your hand so that way we can take questions in the order that they're received. And Mark, we actually have a couple questions that came into the chat that I'll start to read out. So thank you to those who have already started to send through some questions. So the first one being, can you apply brand economics to non-marketing strategy like culture?
Absolutely, yes. And culture ends up being actually very similar to like kind of the other elements of brand. You might have specific behaviors that you would load into here for culture, right? Things like, did they apply for the job, right? If you're attracting new talent, understanding the perceptions around job satisfaction, as well as churn and engagement and volunteerism and things like that. All of the things and the variables that are important to building an amazing culture. And then you can actually start to load in, not things like the sales team and marketing and things like that, but you can actually start to test what you offer your employees and how that leads to greater engagement and tenure, volunteerism, things like that. And that could be elements like, obviously, the salaries being one of them, certain types of benefits, the atmosphere in the organization itself, right? How it's laid out, meal plans, things like that. And you can actually start to test now, how do interactions between these things lead to the perceptions around the satisfaction of your job and your role, as well as do those things lead to job satisfaction and reduced churn and increased volunteerism, things like that, as the start of building an amazing culture.
Great answer. We've got another question. How much data is required for some companies that don't feel like they're data rich?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of data. I think a lot of companies are data rich. They think that they're not harvesting a lot, but there's actually a lot of data there, especially if you've got your customer CRM that's in place. Who they are, where they are, how often they purchased, or if they haven't purchased, right, an abandoned cart, that type of thing. And so all of that data already kind of resides with you, and you don't need a lot of points of data. You just need an intelligent way of stitching together all of these points of data. And so again, the beauty of this is that technology has changed. The access to all of these, what used to be complicated algorithms, which today are offered in countless pieces of software, is actually quite accessible by a lot of people. So I think organizations are definitely data rich. I think where a lot of organizations struggle is launching primary research, right? Launching your own surveys, because that can get expensive fast. And so the best way to kind of circumvent that is survey your existing customer base, right? You know exactly who they are, you've got their contact information, and if you reach out in a very respectful way, I think you'll get some amazing answers back from them of why they purchased and why they didn't purchase.
Great. Okay, and we actually have a few questions that came through, all sort of along the same lines with respect to a copy of the workshop recording as well as the presentation. So with respect to the workshop recording, stay tuned, everyone. That will be made available to all who registered or participated in the session. But with respect to the presentation, so what you walked us through this morning, Mark, is there a way for everyone in the audience to get a copy? Can they reach out to you directly if they'd like to have a follow-up conversation or again, get their hands on the material? What would be the best way for them to be able to facilitate that?
Absolutely. Shoot me a message. You can link me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message and I'll get you a copy of the presentation.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, and we've got some more questions coming into the chat. Thank you everyone again for the questions that are coming in. Feel free to, again, pop the questions into the chat if you'd like, or if you'd like to personally ask Mark, feel free to use the raise hand function on Zoom so we can take the questions, in the order that they're received. So to roll into the next question, when it comes to intangible perception, if you're building your team and company, sometimes we lack the people power to really fulfill the branding. What do you recommend in this case, as the branding may not yet be fully aligned with the company, with what the company can produce as it is still growing?
You know what? Great question. Everybody focuses so much on the branding, right? So the look and feel and all that stuff, and forgets to focus on the brand, which is like the personality and the attributes and the traits of the organization, and dial those up before you start, focusing so much on the superficial side, right? And so I don't see that you're at a disadvantage because you're not focusing on branding. As long as in your material that's going out or the website that you do have, you're really talking about the attributes that are most important to your target market. How it looks is irrelevant because your people will find you and it'll resonate with them, right? Whatever your value proposition is. So I wouldn't worry so much. You're not at a disadvantage. Some of the most iconic brands and the most impactful brands are doing just this, and they are, they have the people power, right? But going beyond the branding, if I'm understanding your question, going beyond the branding and just talking about the things that are most important, that's all that matters.
Great.
I hope I answered your question. Let me know if I did or didn't.
Wonderful. Okay, so I think we actually went through the questions that we had in the chat. We'll leave it open for a couple more minutes if anyone wants to get any last minute questions into the chat, or again, feel free to raise your hand. But in the meantime, I'll pass the mic over to Mark again if you have any sort of final comments or feedback that you'd like to leave with us as we wait for any final questions to come in.
Yeah, I see a question from Sandra. Sandra says, do you have more example questions for reaching out to your contacts in your CRM database? I do, but it all depends on what market you're in. So Sandra, if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I have a few questions around like what industry you're in, and then I can shoot out a few example questions for you. Does that work? Yeah, amazing. Because you really want to tailor it, right, to that industry itself.
Awesome. And I'll speak on behalf of Diana. I saw her message pop in. Great response to the earlier question. So 2 thumbs up there.
Yeah, amazing. And you know, by the way, Diana, with regards to your question, one of the things that, you know, is kind of like nails in a chalkboard for me and like a lot of other strategists out there is that we see people focusing too much on the branding. And what happens is I always ask the question, how do you know what to say on all of your marketing material? If you haven't taken the time to kind of introspect to understand who you are and what your brand attributes are and your personality, and then figure that out about your target market, going beyond the functional stuff, but going to experiential and emotional things, what are you going to actually put on your marketing material? You could literally pick anything, right? I mean, but it might not be the right stuff. But if you take a moment just to understand what that is and talk about that, that's going to have the highest impact, even if it doesn't look great.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, so it looks like we have exhausted all the questions in the chat, although Stephen, a comment is great presentation, which I definitely echo that. So from there, I guess we'll leave it that for anyone who has any questions for Mark, feel free to reach out to him directly through LinkedIn. He'll be happy to provide you with some more information and details. And on behalf of the board, thank you so much, Mark. We really enjoyed your presentation this morning, and we're thrilled that we got to feature 369Konnect and this wonderful material on brand economics. So thank you again. And for everyone who joined us, thank you for spending part of your morning with us. Please keep your eyes peeled to the events calendar on our website to continue to join us for any future workshops or any future events through the board.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.